How's it going, Facebookies? This your boy Javon, and I'm going to try something a little bit different. I put it inside of the news feed that I was curious about, maybe starting a little dialogue, vlog type thing with just ordinary people who share Facebook friendships in common, and just sit and talk from a more human being to human being standpoint, as opposed to just jumping in with a debate and try to prove who's right, who's wrong, which camp is right, which camp is in error, and things of that nature. And so I've been blessed today to have one of my guys that I view as being a friend outside of Facebook. Families have intermingled with one another. A great deal of respect for him. I met him through coaching. He trusted me to coach his son, and I always take that as a very, very serious task, yeah, or a very, very serious thing to have. And so Coach Johnson and I are going to sit here and kind of talk about the Arbery case and some of the things from the perspective of both upper class, lower class, but then also with the ethnic pieces that are involved in me. Obviously, I am a African American or Black man, however you feel comfortable with identifying me with, and he is a Caucasian or a white male. And surprisingly, even though we have contrasting views on certain things, he and I found a lot of connection points on a lot of things that we see similarly or have some of the same values. And so he and I had a little dialogue of sorts on one of his posts, and he said something that really, really piqued my interest. And so I asked him to come on so we can just dialogue about it and just kind of allow you young people, young and old, to realize that we don't have to be news pundits. We don't have to have a degree in communications or what have you, or work for one of these news media agencies in order to really come together and just dialogue with video media and just, have meaningful dialogue. So before I go any further, I want to allow him to introduce himself, but I refer to him as Coach Johnson because, as I say, once a coach, always a coach. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess coach is probably not too appropriate anymore. I haven't coached in a couple of years since I left California, actually. I did try it for a little bit, but I broke my ankle practicing with the boys, and that didn't work out so well. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think that this will be a lot better than, hitting each other up on Facebook, because you lose a lot of context and emotion in a written text, over a post on Facebook. And sometimes those can get misinterpreted, which is actually kind of the post I think that you're referring to. You posted something and I was like, oh, that's not cool. And you're like, well, I was being facetious, right?
Right.
So you definitely lose a lot of context when you have conversations that way. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way to communicate now, whether it's us old people use Facebook now, right? But all the young kids are still using Snapchat and whatever else they've got out there now. But I think this will be good. I appreciate you having me on here.
Hey, you know what? I would, now that I think about it, there's no person more qualified for this. As much as you and I engage and interact on each other's news feeds, in a very, very, respectful yet contrasting way. I mean, why not? So let's jump into it. I want to bring you viewers up to speed. He and I were talking about the Arbery case prior to the deliberations and the verdict. And so, I posited my standpoint that this is one of those cases that just flat out cannot go as unguilty for a myriad of reasons that I was prepared to get into. But I chose to be a little tongue in cheek with how I responded to his post, because I said either I can come across as the angry Black guy, which sometimes, I can be, or I can just be a little more satirical about it. So I decided to chime in this way. So I'm going to read my response and then his counter response, which got us to this place, right? So I said, there are not many certainties in life, but I do know this: regardless of what the legal findings are, if the outcome in these average ordinary white guys who killed a Black man on camera as he was trotting away are found not guilty or charged with lesser charges, there will be smoke in the city, and that is a very terrible possibility. I don't pray much, but when I do, I ask that they throw the book at them fellers, LOL. right? So
And that was the line that got me right there, right?
right. Because clearly I'm able to move around with a wide range of vernaculars, but I don't call people fellers, you know, and for those of you that really know me, I'm not a praying person. I mean, I've made a lot of inquiries on Facebook about the power of prayer, but like I said, that was my way of being able to project it out in a less harmful, less judgmental way, but to put it out there so that the dialogue could be had. So you took that in the appropriate context of lack of context with Facebook, right? And you said that thought process troubles me. Willing to let innocent people get locked up to prevent smoke in the city is precisely the mob rule that needs to be stood up to. History should have taught us that this type of justice is not justice at all, which I totally agree with in principle. But what I want to look at is what America has shown historically to be the case as it relates to large trials, right? And then more particular trials that involve ethnicities being white males and black males. What tends to happen. This is not to say there have not been cases where they got it right, but the reason why I use the term smoke in the city is because it's a popular generational Black term that points to the fact that when we feel like there's just no legal resolution, there's no justice, it's just us, is one of our slogans, then we got to burn it down. And the reason why we feel compelled to burn it down in most cases is because of the feeling that it's not ours in the first place. So when you have a situation where people feel disparaged and people feel like no matter what happens, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, then the logic sometimes is thrown out the window. And then the actions are not to be excused, but they are directly tied into and are direct response of, what happened in the first place. And so what I would like for you to touch bases on is the mob rule angle, since you already have a pronounced feeling about it in the first place.
Well, so to be fair, I didn't necessarily put that response as you specifically believe that, right? But there definitely are a large portion of the population that does. And you can see it a lot on mainstream media. They definitely push that narrative, and I think that's a bit counterproductive a lot of times, because they end up pushing a specific narrative to get clicks or views or whatever. And I don't think that that's necessarily the view of average everyday people. And I've turned to just not even watching mainstream media anymore. I'll turn it on every once in a while just to see what the headlines are, and then you're like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. But yeah, I've never been a big fan of mob rule, right? And if a jury specifically is influenced because of that, and I think there's been a lot of cases in the last year where that's entirely a possibility. Look at the Chauvin case, right, where they were still rioting in Minneapolis, and the jury had to drive through that every day to get to the courtroom, right? Whether or not that did affect the outcome, I don't know. Probably not. He was guilty as hell, right? Specifically in that case. But when you're outside the courtroom, and we saw it in Rittenhouse, right? People were outside the courtroom chanting, if you don't come up with this guilty verdict, we're going to burn it down. You saw it in the Arbery case, where they had a bunch of protesters outside. So the judge ended up moving the jury deliberations from an exterior room to an interior room, out of an abundance of caution, just to kind of make that shield a little bit, kind of separate the jury from being able to hear that stuff. But I guess somebody's right to protest at a courthouse doesn't trump the defendant's right to a fair trial, right? If that makes sense.
No, I totally agree with that in principle. But one of the other shows that I'm on is the other N word, which is nuance, right? When you when you peel back a couple of layers from that, then you can see something a little bit different. And here's what I mean by that. If we're talking about the average American, so it was written in the judicial codes and as it was written in the United States Constitution, I think it's easy to apply the law and say, you know what, the law says this, and therefore this should be the intended outcome, right? It's, as they say, black and white. But what has plagued this country, and the only reason why I want to just focus on this country is because I realize every other country in the world has these same, if not worse, issues to deal with. But we live in this country, and the things that happen in this country will affect our bloodline, our lineage, and it has affected us as human beings to a degree, some more than others, period. So we keep the focus here, not to remove the fact that across the world, the human condition is the same. When we look at cases in which the media is able to take and indict something that already has some racial implications, but they're able to weaponize it immediately, some of it is the playbook for ratings, which is the easy pronouncement of it, right? But if there is no smoke, there's no fire, right? And what I mean by that, if there wasn't enough of this type of sentiment in the minority neighborhoods, then this would fly over our head, right? To be able to pull and extract and manipulate emotion means that there has to be something to draw from. What people of color particularly take issue with in America is this belief, and in a lot of cases, our personal reality, that the law is not applied equally across the board. So when that is the plate, when no matter what you put on a dirty plate, it's going to, in some way, shape, or form, get dirty. And so the media understands that. I know you understand that, and it is taxing, even for someone like me, that I'll be the first one to acknowledge and admit that I've been manipulated by 8-second sound bites in my life, or
Sure.
not reading who it is that is actually producing this piece of writing, taking it for what I thought it was because it was on the internet. Before I started getting more into looking at the authenticity of where the information is coming from. But most people who we call low information type of viewers don't do that. And so the media does have a stranglehold on that. But what cannot be dismissed is that there's too many instances in communities that I come from where before there were social media and there were cameras and there were anyone that would even listen, uncles, grandfathers, great grandfathers came home and told these stories about what happened to them in the streets, either at the hand of, racist white men, or at the hand of police officers who, in their opinion, were overzealous and not applying the law effectively and across the board evenly. And so we've, for generations, heard these stories, seen uncles, fathers, grandfathers come home with visible wounds. But when they report it, it goes under the rug, or in cases where they've been intimidated and pretty much forced not to bring it to the public light, it's something we've internalized as a people. So for us, we know that these things are not just possible, they happen. And the media decides what gets elevated for everyone else to see. But what we know and what we feel every time we see an instance like the Arbery case is that we know that there have been white men that they may not have been in a pickup truck, they may have been on a horse, or they may have been in a posse, or they may have been in a Model T or whatever time you're in. But the same thing happens, is that a Black life is lost, and these individuals are able to walk either because of crooked courts or because the law says that certain things, if they're put in place in the sequence, means that you should get off. But we don't ever really have the opportunity to create the laws. So we always feel burdened by the law. And so I wanted you to understand that that's what the average Black male, regardless of what time period he lives in, thinks the moment that we see something visually, we're like, again, right? And so the last thing we want to see or hear is for someone to be like, hey, but times have changed. We agree, times have changed. These people have died, but ideas are still passed along on our side, on every ethnicity side. And so we're easily manipulated by MSNBC, CNN, et cetera, not because we cling to their words to be true, but because they're actually tapping into a vein of something that we have felt for generations is like, no matter what we try, it happens. Our leaders, et cetera. Go ahead.
I say I understand, right?
Mm.
Obviously, this country's history is marred by a lot of that, right? But what never gets talked about, and this isn't to downplay the struggle of African Americans throughout the country, throughout history, because obviously it's been ridiculous the way that population specifically has been treated since we started coming here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you see a lot of the same thing in rural, poor white America as well. It just doesn't make it to that level of newsworthiness. So there is some socioeconomic issues there that run parallel, right? Obviously, not exactly on the same level, not all the time, but there's definitely some parallels there. But as far as the media goes, I get there's obviously that little string that they can pull to kind of to get at the heartstrings or whatever you want to call it, right? I worry because they've been proven to be wrong so many times, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. You know, they put a story out there, and then a year later they're like, oh well, maybe that wasn't entirely true. And whether or not they come out and apologize or issue a correction or whatever is really hit or miss. We saw that a lot with Rittenhouse, right? Specifically saying, things like he crossed state lines with the gun, or right, he killed 3 black people, right? Or shot 3, killed 2, right? His mom drove him there. None of that stuff was true, and it all came out at the trial.
Right.
And same thing with Arbery, right? He was just jogging through the neighborhood. And the judge in that case specifically told the prosecution that there's no evidence of that they couldn't call him a jogger, right? They tried to get it in, and he's like, no, he was not just jogging through the neighborhood, right? But that was the initial report was, oh, this poor black kid is just jogging through the neighborhood and gets gunned down. So those initial reports oftentimes are wrong. And then and nobody comes out afterwards and says, oh, we're sorry, right? In the Rittenhouse case, the Young Turks came out and apologized, sort of, right? Saying, oh, we got it wrong for the last year, but we weren't really wrong, right? So, so you see a lot of stuff like that. And that's a lot of what gets me upset is the initial jump to conclusions is often wrong. And we're seeing it a lot from the other side now with this guy in Waukesha, right? Who ran through that parade, killed 6 kids and injured like 40 or 50 more.
Yeah, 50 some odd people. Yeah. No, I think the last I heard was like 63, 64 people injured.
Something, right? The number keeps going up. There was another kid that died this morning or last night or whatever.
Yeah, that makes 6. Yes.
Right. But and I'm seeing it on Twitter from, I guess, my side, right? They're immediately jumping to conclusions about it being a retaliation to the Rittenhouse verdict and stuff like that, right? When there's no evidence of that. But on the other side, they immediately reported that he was being chased by police, right? Which is what kind of funneled him in that direction, which isn't true.
Right.
And then they call it like a car accident or a car crash, as opposed to
him swerving, right? as opposed to him swerving, like,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's my issue with specifically the corporate media, not even mainstream media, because there's a lot of YouTubers and stuff out there putting news out that's not necessarily mainstream, but gets a lot more views than CNN does, right? So that's my concern with corporate media, and then people latch on to those concepts, right? And even now, the Rittenhouse verdict has been out for almost a week, and
Yeah.
people are still saying that he took the gun across state lines. Or I read one on Monday, I think it was. Somebody said he killed 2 black guys and shot another one.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I have, real life friends that, as of today still have no real clear understanding of, the real facts in the verdict, And so I totally agree with you on the media manipulation point. There's a lot of fingers to be pointed and there's a lot of ownership to be, transferred to others. I mean, the fact that news and media outlets are taking from amateur video, what, I don't know what you want to call it, people who are filming, video filmers, and they take that, which a person is, in most cases, turn the phone on well after the event has, started. And so they push that first and build their storyline around that, that's where I think we take a hit because, amateur journalists get it wrong a lot of times until they, they learn the ropes and then they learn how to become more polished and effective. So we have this ability to just turn our camera on at any given point in time. And the dangerous part, the scary part to me is we can actually shave and edit our videos, before it even gets taken to a place that can amplify it. And so hands down, the way in which individuals internalize what they think they see, we're at the mercy of the corporate media. But to take it to the thing that kind of sparked my interest at your statement about whether or not jurors have a responsibility solely to the individual or to the community at large, right? I think that if you take away any things that we can string along and say that this creates a sort of precedence, if we were to look at it in isolation, I think almost everyone wants the individual to be seen and to be heard and to be tried and judged based on the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution, the state laws. I think that everyone benefits if it's done that way, because then you have a shot at, there being justice. But I think this notion of justice has kind of gotten convoluted because of the statement I made, which was if the jury doesn't rule a certain way, doesn't its findings are a certain way, there's going to be an immediate response by the general public. I feel like that you weren't comfortable up to this point with saying that that's a possibility, but I feel comfortable saying that happens all the time in this country and has happened all the time. I mean, we may not see it or be aware of how many times in our lifetime, but I know historically there have been lots and lots of decisions made where when they closed the door, they said, hey, listen, this has to go this way or else this is going to happen. And it sucks that it's at the expense of the individual. But once that die was cast the first time, it's kind of like you can't go back and remember that. You can't forget that. So if it's, do we really fairly look at the application of the law with these individuals and deal with whatever comes from it? I think we would then have to challenge the systems and the structure of our American judicial system, which most people don't want to do. Like, when's the last time you've had a newsletter mailed to you telling you the newest laws and statutes that are taking place in your county? Right. That
Never.
so my
Yeah.
point is that never happens. So we're perpetually out of the know as far as what our rights are. And we're just trying to live life. Guys like me and you are trying to live life, raise our families, make a decent living, be impactful in our respected communities, and just try to become the type of men that, will feel proud going in the grave being. And so we don't know about certain laws and statutes and things like that until a high profile case or something like this happens, where now it's like, okay, no, let's look at what the law says. If the law says that in 1845, you could do this because of these reasons. And when it goes unchecked and unnoticed for 100 years, and now it's
Yeah,
being
yeah.
applied in the 21st century, but it was intended specifically for what we saw. But now our social consciousness has changed, and we're like, we don't feel like it should be that way. We don't think that it's wrong to place someone under citizen's arrest. But to the best of my knowledge, this pronouncement of citizen's arrest or deputizing people came from back in the days where the sheriff would deputize people and say, hey, you had the ability to go and pick up these bandits. But by the way, in America, to really go and antagonize and push these freed slaves back into sharecropping, like that was what it was intended for.
Well, a couple things there. One, the citizens arrest law here in Georgia, which they repealed almost immediately after Arbery got killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, that was enacted in 1863, right? So you know exactly what that was for.
Yes, sir.
Right. But on the other side of that, early in the country's history, a lot of cities didn't have police departments.
Right.
Right. Because courts had said that if you have a police department, the city will now be liable for any, riots or major uprising or anything like that. So cities were like, well, screw that. We're not going to be liable for it. We won't have a police department. The citizens can take care of that. And we'll just come in and kind of clean up and do the investigation later. Yeah. Right. But yeah, I don't think there's any doubt where a lot of these citizen arrest laws came from.
Right. And so,
especially here in the South.
Right. And
yeah.
so that's
yeah, I live in Georgia. And for the people that don't know, and I told you this the other day, right? The county that I live in I think it was 1917, right? They ran all the African Americans out of the county, and it was 0% African American up until the early mid 80s. So there's definitely remnants of that, right? Obviously, I don't know how much of that is there, but you still have descendants of that, and even post Civil Rights Act, that's only our parents' age,
right?
So it's not like it was that long ago.
That's exactly what I was thinking. When you dated 1917, I said, in my mind, I said that's 3 generations removed.
Maybe.
Which is not a lot in the context of the fact that means that 4 generations removed. The 60s is 3, which means that there are literally our elders, people that have made it through and seen the end of that, but they're still around to be able to tell you how it impacted them as a teenager or as a young early adult. And so when you put these elements, like, okay, we're looking at in the South, in Georgia, right? The only thing that could have been worse, in my humble opinion, is had it been in Mississippi. Like, Georgia gets a lot of the burden for things, and Alabama gets some flack for things, but Mississippi, it just based on this defiance from even wanting to change course, even in modern times. But what I'm saying is that, so for individuals that see visually that a Black man was being, he was being followed, let's just say followed, if you don't want to say chased, he's being followed by individuals. I mean, I was part of a neighborhood watch, and I've spoken with friends about what we were instructed to do, because we had a officer that was associated with us that came in and gave us our do's and don'ts and all that good stuff. So following him was not the crime, right? But it's just too many things that are stark parallels that we literally in a movie could see a movie where it's like now and then it says 100 years later, and it's that same character just in a different outfit, but they're going to engage in the same mannerisms and the same things. To have him, they tried to stop him, and then he was ultimately killed. If these gentlemen would have gotten off, let me rephrase that. The gentleman would have been found not guilty, because the law says that they can engage in the citizen's arrest under this, and this type of 1, 2, 3, bang, bang, bang kind of sequence. The reason why that would not at all cross the threshold of justice for us is because then the question is exactly what you just alluded to, and I alluded to. When was that law made? That law was made right there at the tail end of the Civil War in an effort to do these things. So even if we're not privy as a whole society as to why these things happen. One thing we know for sure is that ideas are passed down from generation to generation to generation. That is not something that's uniquely Black. That's any ethnicity. That's any people. That's how we're able to keep, traditions going. So individuals that were in that particular time and space that had to deal with that reality told their kids, who told their kids about that, who told their kids that. Fast forward, now we have a very, very loose understanding of what it felt like. But when we see that, it's like there's no way that you're going to say that because of an archaic law, that yes, it's the law on the books, that we should be like, okay, justice was served because by the letter of the law, these gentlemen didn't act in any inappropriate way. But by the way, this law was enacted to do exactly what they did. Like that's where we say we're getting out in the streets and we can care less what the people have to say.
Right. So I guess at what point, say they were found not guilty, right?
Mhm.
Which obviously didn't happen. I do have an issue with some of the verdicts, but if they were found not guilty, right? Or even worse, let's say the evidence showed that they followed the letter of the law, right? And then we're still found guilty to appease the masses,
Yeah.
right? How many people do we sacrifice to that? And if we allow the mob to rule that way, right? How many innocent people go to jail now, right? It's not fair to that person, right? It's not fair to society either, because then you get a bunch of people that get brought up on charges, and because the majority of people say they're guilty regardless of the evidence, right?
Right.
And that would have happened to Kyle Rittenhouse, right? 100% self-defense. And I think a lot of people saw that from the initial video that was even released, even though they immediately went to, murder charges. But if we would have allowed the masses to deem him guilty even before his trial and all the evidence was out, then that 17, now 18-year-old kid would be sitting in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and I
So,
agree.
I mean, is that right? Because, right, it's not right either way. It's definitely a strange dichotomy that is tough, because so, and then think of it this way too. I don't know if you're familiar with the Crystal Kaiser case. Have you heard about that one?
Mm-mm. Is that? Oh no, that's the young lady, right? That is
That's the young
now.
lady
Yeah,
in
that
Kenosha,
was in
Wisconsin,
Yeah, that was
actually,
in Yeah, okay, I didn't recognize it
right?
by name, but yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with
Yeah,
that space
another
in.
one in Kenosha, right? Who was being sexually trafficked as a child.
Right.
She ended up doing, and I just found this out today. Again, initial reports are kind of convoluted sometimes, right?
Right.
She ended up killing the person who was trafficking her,
Mm-hmm.
burned the house down with him in it,
And
stole
then
his
drove
car,
his car.
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I thought it was a shorter time period that happened, but she had spent, I think, almost a year in jail. And then when she got out, she went to dude's house.
Yeah.
Right. So was she right in killing that guy? Yeah, probably. Right. Is society better that he's off the streets? Probably. But did he deserve his time in court to present evidence and all of that? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's a tough,
To me,
like,
that's where we come to this realization that sometimes morals override other morals, and that's where we have what's called the moral dilemma, because I think most people would be better suited to say that we should allow the law to take its course, and to, like you were about to say, allow the individual to have their day in court. But then there's also I think, just based on precedence, is this belief. I'm not even gonna say reality. There's this belief by some people that they're not protected by the law, or specifically in cases of domestic abuse or sexual assault. There have been several cases throughout the last 40 years. I mean, it's been happening throughout history, but within the last 40 years, the light has really been shown on how some of these individuals who commit these heinous crimes against women, young women in particular, and the woman does summon the courage enough to go to the law and get this individual, at least off the streets, that person does the exact same that she did. When they get out, they came and killed their estranged wife, or came and killed the mother of their children, et cetera, et cetera. And then society is like, dang, that sucks, because we say that we got your back, speak up. Somebody that is doing this to you does not deserve anything other than a swift boot to the back of the head. And so you're going through all these proper channels and mechanisms of the law in order to try to do it the right way, but you may lose your life. So when I was speaking with one of my close friends, when I was previewing him to the case, because I seen it on Facebook, and I saw these parallels, like, let me go read on this to kind of figure it out before I speak on it. And I said, you know what, without even knowing this young lady, it probably was one of those things where she was like, you know what, he's never going to go away. And if I try and get away, he's going to kill me. So sometimes, things like that cause us out of acts of desperation to do things that, morally are not right. But let's look at if these three gentlemen actually were in accordance with the Georgia state law. If they were to be sacrificed in order to stave off, like, some real, because I honestly believe that this one would have been the nitroglycerin, just in light of seeing what happened with the policing and George Floyd and all these things that had been building up, going all the way back to prior to Mike Brown. But Mike Brown's case really started where the media started to really amplify and take these tidbits and turn it in and weaponize it against people's racial identifiers. I feel like if those gentlemen would have got lesser charges, like, it would have been like, for my community, you know what, that's it. Because what goes underreported is that when the Breonna Taylor, on the 1 year anniversary of Breonna Taylor thing, there's a gentleman that had created a coalition, and the idea has been said publicly, even going back to the Black Panthers in California, when the NRA and the state of California decided that having Black men with guns is a bad idea. They start legislating against that, even though that runs counter to their whole platform with Second Amendment rights. This gentleman creates a coalition that says, hey, we want to prove a point that once you start seeing armed Black men exhibiting the same posturing and doing the same things in public as we see our white counterparts doing, I guarantee you're going to see the law enforcement apparatus respond differently. That was the whole point. And even if that's an exaggeration or something that we've been conditioned to think is true just based on the past, but it's a cultural mismatch with what 2021 really looks like. I mean, I would like to believe there are way more people that view things the same way you do. And I trust your judgment and your actions based on my interaction with you. And I know that you don't have a racist bone in your body, but there's still this element of the they, whoever the they are, that if we arm up as Black men with the ability to carry semi-automatic weapons, et cetera, boldly, with the same kind of posturing that we see from our white counterparts, we feel like the institution is going to shift a little bit, because every single time we've done that, it has shifted. And so this gentleman is in jail right now, right? Because the main charge is him pointing his rifle at a group of law enforcement agents that were up on the roof, mind you.
You probably shouldn't do that.
But here's my pushback to that. They're in Kentucky. They're in Louisville, Kentucky. They're out in full force.
What's this guy's name?
I
just want to write it down so I can read up on it later.
Just type in Grandmaster J. I guarantee.
Oh, that guy's a moron.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
No.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So aside from the antics and tactics, what I'm saying is this: they said that he pointed his rifle at some law enforcement agents that were strategically placed up on roofs in that community as they were marching through. So my thing is this: you have individuals who are trying to prove a point. They're mimicking something that they say, you know what, the system is broken, and we're going to show you that the system is broken. Because when you place this here and this here, even though it's supposed to be apples to apples. It's not in the face of the
So
law. He went to jail and they charged him for it. But the thing is that he and other witnesses are saying he had it slung with the muzzle up, right? And the flashlight on the front of the muzzle. And immediately looking at the comments, they're like, any dumbass knows that muscle awareness means you have your barrel pointed down
he was
and
supposed to
da
be like
da
an E9 in the army or something too. So he should have known
da.
better.
Yeah. But my thing is that there's it seems like either in our application we shoot ourselves in the foot unknowingly trying to bring awareness to something, or like what's written in the memoirs of the late J. Edgar Hoover, who upon his death, decided that he was going to shock the system by just releasing the findings of every ideology that the FBI had at that particular point in time, which was in particular, and any opportunity to be able to extinguish or to take away the Black man's ability to defend themselves, we're on board with that. If that means we take care of their leaders, we do that. If it means that we push false narratives, we do that. If it means that we set the entrapment kind of cases and they fall victim of it, we do that, because at the end of the day, from this point forward, we will choose their leaders. Like, that's paraphrasing, but that came from his mouth through the Bureau. So if we have the Federal Bureau of Investigations that has said our job, among other things, is to ensure that Black people do not have the ability to mobilize and to place themselves in positions where they can strongly object to what goes on in this country, then it's like every time we see this, for those of us that know this, like, aha, I see it again. I see it again. I see it again.
Yeah.
And that's the part that sucks. Like that dude, like you said he's a moron. And I don't have a problem with it at all, because a lot of he reminds me of a shock jock. A lot of stuff I feel like he's put out into the public and he said is just to stir up and to create this controversy, which I totally get it. Whether I agree or not, that's not the point. But my thing
And
is
that's
this.
fine. And him and his NFAC group marched through Stone Mountain down here.
Yeah.
Right. And they were all armed and, whatever, and harassing drivers that were trying to go see Stone Mountain.
Yeah.
And they didn't arrest anybody. Right. They didn't point guns at anybody. It was just verbal. Right.
Yeah.
As they're marching down the road, and nothing happened. Right. So if you're going to do something illegal, like point a gun at a cop, then.
But at this point, we have to say allegedly. At this time, we have to say allegedly.
Has he been to trial yet?
No.
He's
in jail right now, and there's a right thing that I read upon, and a wrong thing. The judge made two pronouncements of this gentleman. He said, one, what's your standard? Until this thing plays itself out, he is not to be within a certain amount of feet of a firearm, period. Right? Which standard operating procedures, totally get that. But then the judge also put a gag rule on him in which he's not at all able to communicate using any social media platform, period. If he does, then that violates him. That violates something that he has in the works right now. And I thought that was very interesting, because if some conservatives have railed against censoring Donald Trump because of his ability to successfully get his message out that he wholeheartedly believes in, and that, people are still willing to listen to and to kind of figure out, how they fit, what they feel, and how they can still, what's the word I'm looking for? Still promote his agenda. Then here's this guy, if nothing else, he was able to demonstrate that he can get together a few thousand Black men that are working class citizens. Now, if he went armed, guys that had felonies that shouldn't even have weapons in their vicinity, or if they had a violent past. But what I'm saying is the point is that he was able to mobilize individuals like me that really, for lack of a better term, have been trying to be on the straight and narrow, and therefore they passed the smell test. Like, you can't just stop me and tell me that, I can't have my firearm in my possession, because I've checked off all of the things I need to check off. But what it is that if you get 1,000 of me out there where you can't just quickly disqualify or dismiss or even arrest, then it's like, hold on. So now we got to sit here and figure out how long we're going to allow this to go on before the public's perception of this starts to play into how we have to police this. Like, it's just too deeply embedded into our DNA, the fabric of this country, that having armed Black men tends to make people nervous. I mean, it just shows over and over again. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen with other ethnicities, but again, where I think, if nothing else, the blind privilege is there, is that there's millions of white guys that go out and hunt. Like, they literally hunt for their food, and their weapon is pretty much, it can be written off as taxes because that's part of their work. That's how they feed their family, and it's totally fine. And you can be in a community of 1,000 hunters and no one is nervous. It's like, all right, it's cool. You guys hunt. I get it. But given what we as African Americans tend to do with ourselves with guns, and then what we have the potential to do when misled or inspired, I just don't think that the American law enforcement community as a whole ever is going to let that take place without there being some way to break it up, without there being some way to sabotage it before it can actually, do what it's intended to do. Because I do think that these gentlemen that followed him, regardless if they're being manipulated a lot, they're like, you know what, I want to pressure the NRA. I want to see if they're going to feel comfortable with us being armed with the same weapons, in the same way, pushing a counter agenda. And I just don't think that we've seen it enough to where it's like, okay, America's past that. So we get mad.
But so the counter to that would be, when was the last time that you've seen, a couple hundred white guys with rifles marching down the street?
Now, I don't have the statistics, but I know I've seen glimpses of Proud Boy rallies where they're loaded up. But I don't remember the Tiki Torch mob. I don't remember the Tiki Torch mob that was in Virginia when that took place. What I'm willing, without even knowing, what I'm willing to believe is that all around America, white men come together, and whether it's gun shows or expos or hunting, this, and that, or even just to protest the Second Amendment. Matter of fact, now that you make mention of it, in Minnesota, when Michigan, excuse me, when all this gun stuff started coming to the forefront of a way for them to divide us as average Americans, they mostly, if not all, white males armed themselves, and it was hundreds of them. They went to down to the state building and attempted to kidnap the governor.
No. You see, there you go.
That didn't happen.
No, that was an FBI plot.
They went to nobody went to jail for that, because I feel like the last thing I seen was there's like 5 or 6 dudes that conspired. They had them in jail. Did they let them go?
There was like 5 or 6 guys, and then like 8 or 9 FBI agents that kind of pushed that.
So okay, so what I'm asking you is, are you saying that the crowd didn't go there, or
no? So they're two separate things.
Okay,
right. That crowd did go to the Capitol in Michigan to protest. I don't even remember what it was.
The open carry.
Right. As is their right to do. Right.
Yeah.
And Grandmaster Jay and his NFAC did the same thing here in Georgia, and nothing happened. And Black Panthers did it too here in downtown, like 5 minutes down the road from where I live.
Yeah.
And nothing happened. So because they weren't doing anything illegal. Now, if you're going to march down the street and allegedly point your gun at a cop,
yeah,
that's a different story, right? Which he'll get his day in court to be able to hash that evidence out, I hope, right?
Yeah. But, well, he's on pace to. Yeah, I mean, he's still there, and it's taking its course. At least it doesn't at all appear to be as if it's being stalled out. Like it's taking it, from what I've read, it's taking the normal course for a case like this to take place. It's not
Yeah, I've
like they're
stopped
denying
following
him.
it.
Yeah, they're not denying him due process. And I was looking at some of the stuff, even on some of the liberal news outlets, and I saw they weren't crying foul ball, because usually it's the left or the right is crying foul ball on their platforms, one or the other. This is one of the few where both, because I was looking at the Washington Post, I think the Huffington Post, and then I did circle back around to Fox News, to their main website, and I was looking at it because they had a little thing that came up, and I'm like, okay, they're all pretty much saying the same thing. I mean, of course, they are hoping for different outcomes, but they're saying right now it's going through it's going its course. But what I'm saying is that I agree. If something happens that's not supposed to happen, then who cares what your intent was? The law enforcement has to react to what happened. But what I'm saying is, in the same vein, is that there is a belief in my community that we're not able to get to the point where a point is moved. There's always something that's reported that happens that either undermines what we're doing, or you said there's FBI agents that were implicated in that hoax. The FBI has infiltrated every single Black operation that had the best of intentions, from the SCLC to SNCC to CORE, to the Rainbow Coalition, to hell, even Reverend Al had to flip and turn into an FBI informant to be able to do his greasy work, right? But I'm just saying, it just seems like, from a person like me, just the average everyday Black guy that just grows up with uncles and grandfathers and people in the community talking about stories, it's like every time we try to show that we are capable of doing things to police ourselves, or to do things within the confines of the law, somehow, like I said, either our leadership, something runs afoul, and next thing you know, all these scandals come out about them, they get locked up, or there's these agitators mixed in, like when with this whole thing with agitators being mixed in, and that's what's being used on both sides, is no, this wasn't really our group. There was a handful of people that just wanted to make us look bad. This is a classic example of what we think happens to us all the time. We think that there are agitators that are built into every single instance where we try to say, America, we don't want to beg for you to help us. We don't want to play the race card. We want to be able to step up as men in our communities. And we got it from here. Just give us leeway. It's like somehow somebody go to jail, and it's like, oh, this person. So Grandmaster Jay might be the next agitator that was mixed in to poison it, but that's what we see
There
on
is some
TV.
rumor about that too, but
Yeah.
but I mean, back to the firearms issue, how much of that is the inner city community shooting everybody else in the foot, right? Because I mean, just look at South Chicago, for example, right?
Yeah.
Where you got gangbangers they're killing people daily with firearms. So that helps to perpetuate that, I guess, perception, right? That if you see a Black guy with a gun, you better cross the street, right?
I have no
Fortunately, I
problem.
don't buy into it,
No,
right?
I have no problem with acknowledging that is a huge hindrance. That is an absolutely huge hindrance, but that also can fall into the category of the sabotage that's put there. Because last time I checked, I remember seeing something a few years ago before Mayor Lightfoot even got there. Right? Who was before her? Emmanuel? Was Emmanuel before her?
I don't remember.
There was someone, I think it was Emmanuel, that was before her, that they ran an absolute they ran like a 3 or 4 day little expose on it, and they were talking about how they were going around putting cameras and mics in the faces of gang bangers. And that part always pisses me off. Like, don't go to the lesser of us with the strobe light, because then it only feeds into the perception. But they have these knuckleheads, and they're talking about how it ain't their fault. They literally was out there just, on the grind, selling their dope, and they see a car stir off, and in the alleyway, there's this crate full of guns that magically appear. And I remember seeing this dummy like, hey, you can't blame us. You know what I'm saying? We didn't bring these guns in here. Somebody just dropped them off in the alley. And I was like, I remember saying to myself, like, you're a jackass. Like someone had enough of an agenda to say, let's put the mic in front of this dummy, and he's going to help to bolden this line that is a hindrance to us. Because I know without a shadow of a doubt, if there are enough white individuals in America that want to turn the page, they really, really understand that just as much as they get they get this false perception of privilege and all these things that they know in their day-to-day lives means nothing to them, and it's not even anything, any space they operate in, they would love for that to go away. Trust me, there are enough Black people that would just love for the gang violence and all that stuff to just
For
move
sure.
to the side, so that people, if nothing else, can recognize that's just a small segment of the population. But when that's the amplification, like the music, the culture, the gun violence, all that stuff is thrown into the mainstream way, way more than the individuals that are serving their country, are off at law school, are opening up their own businesses, are
Becoming
14
teachers.
years old, and mom for 14th birthday got her son the LLC because he loves cars. So she wants him to be able to learn how to sell used cars. I mean, those kind of stories are marginalized because you can say exactly what happened with this gentleman. The first thing they put out was that he was a rapper, the guy that ran the car through the people. He's an aspiring rapper. And then they even referenced his music. They played it like where he's saying these things. Every rapper says F the police. And that's just part of what's built into the hip hop culture, the no snitching, free, blah, blah, blah. There's probably somebody right now wearing a shirt that says free that guy, just because it's embedded into the culture of hip hop to be that anti police. But the thing is that we understand, or I understand, that every time there's this instance where Black on Black crime is showcased, it almost compels a white person that's willing to just be bygones, bygones, and say, listen, let's just see how we can come together and we can build a better tomorrow. It puts them off, like, you know what? For you to say that only thing that happens in your communities is that the white man's holding you down, I can't dismiss this. Like, I'm seeing this too much. And that's something that we fight against, for those of us that want to make a difference. But at the end of the day, history just hasn't been on our side. And so it's harder to get out from underneath that rock. There's white on white crime that statistically is higher than Black on Black crime just because of the numbers. And we know that, right? But when a person says, well, there's all this Black on Black crime in the inner city, why don't you guys focus on cleaning that part up, right? Because it seems like that happens more than a white cop doing anything to a Black person in the streets. Then the retort is, yeah, but it's already been legitimized that has been pushed into our community, and that psychology has been cultivated. That's not like something that's new. Like
Yeah,
since
I'm not a big
68.
fan of saying that you need to clean up your Black on Black crime because it happens more than white cop on Black man, right?
Mhm.
Because you're going to commit crimes against the people that you're more likely to encounter, right? So inner cities that are a vast majority African American communities, of course you're going to have more African American on African American crime, right? You go to a gated white Gulf community, of course you're going to have more white on white crime because that's the people that you're encountering every day, right? So I've never liked that argument. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, but that's one of the immediate pushbacks. And like I said, if that piece could be pulled away, then I think we would have a space to say, but there's certain structures, because I think, and just in closing, I think that this is something that maybe you'll be able to recognize to be the case. When we're talking about these ethnic issues at ground zero on the ground, most white and Black and Latino and Hispanic, this Hispanic and Asian and indigenous peoples aren't necessarily at odds with their neighbor and coming over saying, hey, you are trading on my rights, or you are a racist, you're making it unsafe for me to move around in my space. when these things happen in public and minorities or marginalized people start to speak up, I think that what it gets lost is that we're speaking about the structure and the invisible they, not our neighbors, not the people we serve with, not the people that we see in common when we go to an eatery or when we go to on vacation or any of those kind of things. We're not, as minorities in many cases, saying that our neighbor is racist and making our life hard and they got they got their boot on our neck. What we're typically saying, and it comes out in the expression privilege, is that we have to don a certain persona immediately when we leave our home and we leave our protected spaces culturally, subculturally, and we have to act a way which has historically been to be pleasing to the general public, just so that we can move around in that space free of harm or ridicule. For myself, I know for a fact, and you know this, I live in a predominantly Hispanic community, 90 something odd percent for the city's population, and a handful of others, or and not counting the military community that comes in. And then when you go north in Ventura, the city of Ventura, mostly white individuals. You go south into Camarillo and in the TO area, mostly white people or people of influence. I know for a fact, and I play this game, walking around, suit, tie, cufflinks, pocket square, clean cut, I get approached and I feel in a lot of spaces, the energy is different than when I have on my Raiders hoodie and I have on my baggy sweats and I have on my Jordans. I mean, it's a test that I do sometimes just as a litmus test. I'll do it. And sometimes I go to the same spaces, but just dressed differently. And like I said, the energy or the perception is strikingly different because we associate. And when I put my hood on, big, brolic, stout black guy, like I know what I'm up against. But sometimes I feel like I shouldn't have to be mindful of that. That part is a little bit unfair that I have to be mindful. I could say, fuck it, I'm just gonna wear what I want to wear. You're just gonna have to, deal with it. But when you're in the space where you're one-on-one or you're the minority, sometimes you're a lot more receptive to the shifts of expectations versus if everyone or most of the people around you are doing the same thing. It just makes you more oblivious to it. And it may even just feel like a cultural thing. I don't think that there's a such thing as acting white, even though I made that remark or that joke before. What I think is that because there have been more white people in these spaces that create these norms and mores, that's just the way that people live. But minorities have had to plug in to that. Like we don't have a choice in that matter. And so I think all those things come to the forefront when we're looking at what happened with this case. Like Black people, like we don't have the luxury of following after a white guy for blocks and blocks and having guns drawn and have even, God forbid, have the cops respond and see it and see three black guys with a white guy that for all intents and purposes look like he's jogging. We just don't feel that we would be given or portrayed in the same light as those gentlemen were. And that's why we already have this pre-anticipated angst like, oh, this cannot happen. This better not happen. Because in our world, like it just hasn't been shown to be equal in application.
I guess I mean, obviously I can't understand it. I do kind of understand that because everybody has a perception of who you are based on how you look, right? But I agree with how you phrased it when you said that you probably perceive that energy shift a little bit more or a little bit differently than say I would, right? I mean, obviously I would get looked at differently if I was walking down the street with a suit and tie or jeans and a hoodie, right? But like you said, you're probably more aware of that energy shift, and maybe rightfully so, right? based on the past and how things have gone down when, minorities walk down the street in a predominantly white neighborhood. I think there's definitely an argument there, right? But as far as the Arbery case goes, if you want to get specific about it, I guess the argument would be, how many times are white guys breaking into, right? There was no door on that house, right? But
Yeah.
going into a house of somebody and then running off in the middle of the street in a predominantly minority neighborhood, right? So the opportunity to chase down and hold a white guy at gunpoint is probably a little bit less. Now, I in no means want to justify what they did, because that was absolutely
No,
ridiculous.
I'm not
Right.
even getting that. I'm not even getting
But
that impression.
I mean, so to make that analogy is tough, because there's not many opportunities for that.
But that opens up a whole nother can of worms, because a counter to that would be that there isn't a push or a desire for white males to go into the Black community at all in the first place, unless it's really there as a business opportunity. I would believe that to be true. But most Black or minority communities that have houses that are being renovated or being being retrofitted so they can go back on the market, most inner city communities are places where people are forced into just based on socioeconomic labels or proximity to the job. And so if we looked at gentrification, that might be different, because there is a process in a lot of minority neighborhoods where now they're being retrofitted and upgraded to the point where white people are now wanting to come in and to live there. And there's a big argument about that. But in the hood, so to speak, no one wants to be in the hood in the first place. Black people or anyone that's forced to live in the hood doesn't want to be in the hood. So to say that there wouldn't be that opportunity, yeah, that's correct. But that's because of the issues that are already going on in that community. If that guy went into that place and trespassed 4 times, which they say that they have him on camera doing, totally get that. If there's trespassing charges to have been brought up on him, totally get that. But the thing is that even in spaces where a Black doctor or dentist or somebody else moves into a community like that, there's been plenty of cases where it's called mistaken identity, where individuals in that community are like, hey, we don't know who you are from a can of paint, right? Who are you and why are you here? And in some cases, that person decides, okay, I'm going to play the game. I'm such and such, and I'm here to inquire about this, and that. There's still those individuals who walk away that can tell their story like they made it painfully obvious that they didn't want me there, and that I wasn't given the same due diligence that others would have. Or in your case, you're 20, you did 20 years in service, right?
Yeah.
Okay, 20-year veteran. You're aware of the Black guy, the officer in uniform, right? Accosted, pulled out his vehicle, and all those crazy things that took place, even though in this country, what we're supposed to elevate in time again over everyone else, when all things is equal, is the patriot or the service member. Serve your country should give you a certain level of reverence. And it's shown throughout we have all these different holidays, we have all these different sales, we have all these different things that we do to salute our service members. But even in that space, race does occasionally poke his head up. And then you can say, well, what about that E2, E3 that's only making that small BAH? If they go live inside of an inner city, are they going to get ran out the same way as that E6, E7, E8 that's moving into a more affluent community? I don't think that those pan out evenly. It just sucks that that's the way our country appears to be. but it shows up. It just shows up more and more. I
Well,
mean,
in the case of that officer, right? I
yeah,
don't know how the police were supposed to know his race when they first started to try and pull him over, and he
yeah,
didn't stop. Right
yeah.
now, he did what most people are told to do: go to a gas station, right,
Yeah.
or a well lit
Well, that area.
place,
Hmm.
right? Um, but I don't know that they knew his race when that whole interaction started,
But
right? So
clearly,
they
the
basically,
officer got at some point. The officer got annoyed by him saying that I do not want to get out of the car. My registration, all my stuff is here. I got my hands here. It just, and I understand when you're in a position of authority, the last thing you want is for someone to question your authority.
well, I don't even think it was that so much. It was they tried to pull him over and he didn't stop. So that automatically raises their level of awareness and already starts that tension, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Sometimes, and then once they got to where they stopped, they needed to de-escalate the whole situation, right?
Right.
Neither one of them wanted to de-escalate anything. He's like, I'm not doing anything you're telling me to do, and they're like, you're going to do everything we tell you to do, right? And
Yeah.
it just kept building and building and building until they pulled him out and pepper sprayed him and cuffed him, and then eventually they're like, hey, sorry, trying to smooth things out, which was ridiculous too, right? um so I don't say he's completely innocent in that whole interaction, because he didn't help to de-escalate the situation either. But it's not necessarily his job, um, right? So the police in that should have done a way better job, and I'm all right with whatever they got.
Yeah. Last I heard from that, the two officers in question were fired from their post.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think it's for like what you said, which is the onus. Like the coin flip is more so on the side of the officer to be professional and to walk the line, so to speak. But I mean, the only reason why I make mention of that is because no matter what vein a person of color travels in, all it takes is that one instance to bring us to the cultural reality. Um, in the mid to late 1960s, Black people in America were essentially given their legal freedom, right? Their body had been freed since the 1860s, but in 1965, they were given their all rights due to them, right, in a court of law and in any type of public space. But what, in my opinion and the opinion of others, has never really had a full transfer along with that new set of freedoms was respect. And so we feel the disrespect. And after a person has habitually been a part of something, it does make them hypersensitive. I don't care who or what it is. If you've been brutalized by this person, these people that wear pink hoodies with a stocking over their face, so you can't see them, but it's happened to you 1, 2, 3, 4 times, or once to you, two to your cousin, once to your aunt. At some point, when you see a person wearing a pink hoodie and a stocking over their face, you're going to make assumptions. Now we can say, hey, that's your fault for in that moment, looking at it in its worst potential and then responding to it in kind before it even happens. But we are creatures of habit. And so I like having dialogues like this. I really, really thank you for being willing to come and just, have the dialogue with me and to kind of share your lens, because what's often missing is for people to look at one another as, you know what, we are all the sum of our own experiences, right? And so what we've been through does shape how we see things. And that's the one thing we have in common. What we have been exposed to does shape who we are. And so if we can look at, okay, well, why is it you see this one when I see something differently, and we're able to make that connection? Oh, it's because you were here, or you grew up there, or this was said to you, or this happened to you at this age. Then it's more like, aha, I get it. It's not like I need to change you. You need to come to my line of thinking And if not, then you're the other and we are the we. It's more like, oh, so now we can have the conversation like, well, how do we fix this?
That's what I was
But
going to say. So
yeah,
what do we do to fix it? I mean, and that's a really broad and extremely difficult question to answer, right? There's obviously no one thing,
yeah.
but I don't know. I don't know how to fix it.
I think that the first thing is to be able to be willing to communicate with a wide variety of people outside of your own particular set of circumstances. Because when we're in our echo chamber, there's no room for growth. There's really no room for understanding. But I think even people who have remarked about the most profound transformations they've had usually came after encountering another human being, encountering something else. So even if you talk to 10 people and there's hit and miss, that 11th person might be able to give you a little bit of a perspective. And you're like, oh, and then you as a father, now you're embedding that into the way in which you raise your kids, which in turn helps them to determine how they're going to reshape their world. Like we guys like you and I, we can't change this world. Like we still are part of that generation that allowed it to be screwed up. But our children have the ability to change. And that's why I love being an educator, because I know, and I tell them all the time, I say, listen, young people, we have screwed this thing up trying to make it better, but you ultimately have an opportunity to fix things for yourself. Like I can't fix it for you. All I can do is tell you what happened historically and how I feel as a person. But you guys are the ones that are going to imagine and shape this world that you walk into the next 15, 20, 30 years, 40 years. I'm going to be out of here. Right. But what they decide to do with that is going to be the difference. And so we still can spread these seeds. Like we still have an opportunity to start explaining to these young people in a vulnerable way how much we've fell short, and then say, this is what I've learned. It may have took me 36 years, 40 years, 45 years, but here's what I learned. Yes, your dad or your mom had to deal with this, and that, and that was unfortunate. But if you do this and this to your neighbor, you guys don't have to worry about that. So at this point, we have to transfer the good knowledge that comes from the experience and, give them the wisdom and allow them to take that and change it. But we as older, middle-aged people, we can't do anything to change this. Like
And that's getting more and more difficult with social media, right? Because their algorithms push stuff to you that you're more likely to look for yourself anyway.
Yeah.
And if you're not looking for opposing views to challenge yourself and help yourself grow, the YouTube and Facebook algorithms are just going to keep pushing you the same garbage that you already believe in.
Right.
And I posted on Facebook the other day that I didn't know that there was one event specifically, right? But over the last 2.5, 3 years has been a major red pill to take in regards to the justice system. Just growing up, you're like, oh, you get arrested, you probably did something wrong, which is still typically true, right? But then you're going to go see your day in court and everything's going to work out okay. And that's just not the case. And we're seeing it more and more as more and more trials and court proceedings are televised and access to them becomes easier, right? That realization that the justice system isn't there for justice is a big red pill that a lot of people need to swallow, right? And
Yeah.
Until people start going out on their own and searching for ideas that are going to challenge themselves intellectually, it's going to be really hard, because like I said, social media pushes that algorithm to you and says, here's what you're going to see. And if you're not willing to step outside of that, that's all you're going to see.
No, I totally agree with you. And I came to that realization. That's why what I've done for myself is I start to just repost some of the stuff from some of my Facebook friends who have that blatant conservative vein of information going, because then it does cycle through for me. And me being a staunch independent, like I've flat out said it millions of times, like there's some things I'm conservative about, there's some things that I'm liberal about, and I try to digest the stuff and decide for myself what I want to stand behind and what I recognize as manipulation. But you're right. I mean, our sample size is kind of rigged, you know, and then the climate outside for us is really, really rigged. It's but you know, again, just simple things like increasing your circle with individuals that add to your perspective or add to who you are. Like I use this term build, you know, to denote that. You know, anytime I'm having a conversation with somebody has given me one thing that I know I'm going to use in another conversation at some point, they've added to me. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm a lot more gracious and a lot more vocal about that exchange of knowledge and perspective, because that's the part that's missing is, are we really building with one another anymore? Like we're now just debating. Like you and I could have came with a bunch of cue cards with just some points, but we probably, no, I know for a fact we'd have been talking over each other. And there wouldn't have been times where we just were able to get 3, 4, 5 minutes worth of thoughts out. But I heard everything that you said. I know you heard everything that I said. And this approach is what we need more of. And that's why, like I said, I wanted to just try this just to see. But I mean,
Yeah,
it just fills my cup. So
you see that a lot with pundits and talking heads, right? They all have a cue card list of stuff that they got to say, and then people latch onto it, and that's part of the problem with corporate media is you only have a 2 or 3 minute segment until the next commercial to say the most provocative thing that's going to get more viewers, right?
yeah,
Which is why I've really turned off of that, and I've gone into watching a lot more independent news type stuff, on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, right?
yeah,
And even more specifically, a lot of lawyers. There's probably 15 or 20 lawyers that I'm subscribed to on YouTube now that all have different perspectives, but it definitely challenges you to at least go look up what they're saying and verify that. And a lot of people don't do that, right? They just take whatever CNN or Fox News or whatever says is gospel, and as opposed to challenging that narrative. But
that's where you kind of added to me, just in this new vein, because I remarked on your page, just seeing that, you're getting into this, play by play type of mode with information, but it shows that you're actually taking the time to do the legwork, which is totally different than just looking at a meme and just clicking and being like, yeah, I like the meme.
I do
you
a lot of
know
that too. But
yeah, I mean, I do that when I have an agenda of sorts, and it's usually just for dialogue. But I'm saying, just seeing you do that, start to do that on a more regular basis, it caused me to be like when I saw the case with the young lady with the sex trafficking, I came across that on your feed first, and I was like, oh snap, I didn't know anything about that. Let me
right.
get on board with that. And even the gentleman who he was acquitted the same day that Rittenhouse was, for the firefight he had with the federal marshals, and that just slid under. And I was like, I see what they try to do to me here. They tried to get me to say that this never ever happens to anybody that's black. Everyone that's black definitely goes to jail, wrongful, da da da. But apples to apples, if it has to do with just self-defense, this is the second instance I can see with my own two eyes. The gentleman that got into the firefight with Breonna Taylor dying, he was able to beat his charges because self-defense. They had that silent knock, no warrant knock and all that stuff. And so yeah, if someone just kicks in your door shooting, be like, hey, are you the police? They might say yeah and not be the police. But so I just had to say, you've kind of helped me to say, you know what, I want to delve a little bit deeper into that vein and probably put that on my page. So if I mimic it, it's because it said imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? So if you see me with the play-by-plays on something that comes out, it's because I've seen how effective you caught my attention with it.
And I started doing that because, one, I don't have a platform on YouTube, right? But and I'm not a lawyer, so trying to explain some of that stuff is not easy. But I really started it, I think, with Rittenhouse, right? Because you look at all the media lies that were out there, and I watched, other than jury selection and a couple of the pre-trial hearings that they had, I watched literally every second of that trial, from opening statements to acquittal, right?
Yeah.
And then you get done, or in the middle of watching a trial, you look at CNN or Fox News or something blatantly lying about what's being presented in court. I'm like, well, all right, well, I know I've got people on Facebook that can't have the time to pay attention to it like I do, right? So maybe this will be some useful information that people don't necessarily know. And I tried to do that a little bit with Arbery as well. I didn't watch nearly as much of that trial because I knew in my heart going into it how that was going to go and how it should go. But and I think most of the country did too. I think a lot of people were just waiting for a not guilty verdict to get that next headline, but it didn't come. So
yeah, I agree.
but there's definitely a lot of people on Facebook. I hope that it was able to, at least shed some little bit of light on the media narrative that was just not true in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you on that, man. So like I said, man, you've definitely added to me. So I feel it necessary to let you know that you did help me build on that, because I plan on taking that, and helping to sharpen my observations of these high profile cases in particular, as opposed to just being manipulated by the emotion and the intentional left or right wing pull that's often associated with them.
Well,
So
especially when the media narrative immediately jumps to make it a racial issue, right?
yeah,
And antennas should definitely go up as soon as that happens. Like, okay, so what are they trying to push?
yeah,
And you saw it right away with Rittenhouse. Like I said before, shot and killed two black guys and shot another one, right? That's been the narrative. And I think it was the Independent published that article a couple days ago that said that same thing after the trial, right?
yeah, that's crazy.
So it's just, I think it's just super important, and I've always said it, but never really put it into practice, right? And just go out and find the information for yourself,
Yeah.
right? Go search and find the court documents if you have time. There's definitely a lot of enlightening things in court documents that you can find. You're like, oh, I didn't know that, right? So
yeah. Well, man, it's been a great journey, man. Great groundbreaking journey. I like I said, my cup is full of what I hoped to achieve here with you. I knew it was very much achievable, but I'm happy to have been able to make it through this conversation, and for it to be 1,000% organic, and for us to just share perspectives and ideas, and not be compelled to have to defend one way or another, just sharing ideas. I mean, that's all that I hope for. So this is great for me. Hopefully you got a good takeaway from this. I'm going to go ahead and archive this and put this up on all my platforms. So if you blow up and you become famous, like, I need a finder's fee. I'm just letting you know right now. If they be like, hey, that dude that was on there, oh, he's hilarious, man. I need a finder's fee for that, because we do live in a world.
Maybe I'll be the next great thing. I don't know.
Hey, listen,
No,
I in this
appreciate
world,
it.
we go
And
viral.
I was a little bit apprehensive going into it, right? I mean, obviously I agreed right away to do it. And then I think the next question was, well, what do you want to talk about? Right.
Yeah.
With the idea of, well, I can have my next screen. I got 5 of them sitting here filled with a bunch of talking points, and we can hash things out. And then you were like, no, it's just, we'll start with Arbery and the conversation will just kind of go where it goes, right? And I was like, all right, I can do that. And no, it's been a great conversation. I appreciate it. I hope that more people are able to sit down with you and do the same kind of thing.
I'm hoping so too, because this is literally what happens outside of the social media world. Like, social media is so scripted, and people are trying to go viral and monetize. Like, if you meet somebody out just at a park or just anywhere wasting time, wife and kids are in there shopping somewhere, and you sit outside and you see somebody come sit next to you, usually you just sit and just talk. It just doesn't matter where it goes, you just talk.
Yeah, we definitely don't have enough of that anymore.
Yeah.
Especially with people that don't necessarily that share the same kind of views. right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, obviously we agree on some things and don't agree on some other things, but the ability to sit down outside of social media and have a great conversation. I guess it's been what, almost 2 hours, and it feels like 5 minutes. It's been great. So I
Yeah.
definitely appreciate it, and hopefully other people that uh, you can get on here don't necessarily agree with you as well.
Yeah.
It's easy to have a conversation with people that agree, and you just echo each other's thoughts back and forth, and whatever. But like you said earlier, you don't really build yourself that way. So
Mm-mm.
um,
Mm-mm.
and I didn't go into this thinking that I'll be the first of the next Joe Rogan podcast, right? But hopefully you can get some more people on here and have the same kind of conversation, because it's been awesome. I
Yeah, I
appreciate it.
got right now. I think I have 5 individuals that hit my message box, like people that respond to the post. I see they're kind of vanilla on it, but I've actually had 4 of the people like, hey, let's do it at some point. So it's just about carving out the time and the space. But pioneers, man,
Yeah, I mean, this is literally the same way that Joe Rogan started, right? But he already had some level of celebrity to
yeah,
kick things off, and
yeah.
but and now he doesn't talk to quote unquote normal people.
It's
But
funny. It's
there's
funny
still
how that.
interesting
Yeah,
conversations, and I listen to damn near all of them, but
yeah,
they're not normal people.
right. I mean, we all say that we're gonna stay true to the intent until somebody puts some money in your face. So if I call you
Yeah.
one day and I'm like, listen, I'm only gonna have conversations with congressmen and lawyers and all that, don't take it personal, then that's just because I sold out. But at least I'll own it.
a
I'll own
hundred
it real
million will
quick.
do that to you.
I'll own it real quick. I'll be like, I'm rich. I'm rich. Okay, man. Well, I'm gonna let you go, man. I gotta get going myself. Again, thank you for trusting the process and for being willing to come here, not knowing exactly where we were gonna go. But I was intentionally that vague just so that it wouldn't come across as anything other than authentic. And so we checked those boxes. I appreciate you. I'll be checking in with you on your post, man. Next time you put something in thought provoking out there. And so I'm gonna go ahead and
Next
let
trial should be
this.
that cop in Minnesota that shot. I can't even remember his name. The taser lady.
Oh yeah.
Her
Oh
trial's coming up.
yeah. That's so
That'll be the
unfortunate.
next one. I think they have video going. Ghislaine
Yeah.
Maxwell's going on next week, but they won't broadcast that as federal court. So
Yeah.
hopefully, and I've definitely got some thoughts about that one. So it'll be interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, man. I'll hit you up.
All right, absolutely,
All
anytime.
right. All right. Later.
All right, man. Bye.